A 911 call was received at 2:17 a.m. from a house that had been empty for 10 years. At exactly 2:17 a.m., a 911 operator received a call that would never be explained. The night shift had been quiet, filled with the soft clicking of keyboards and the low hum of distant conversations. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place, until that call came in. 911, what's your emergency? There was silence at first, but not the normal kind. This silence felt heavy, like someone was there but too afraid to speak. Then a faint whisper broke through the line. Please help me. The operator immediately straightened up and spoke with urgency, asking the caller to share her location. The voice on the other end trembled as she said that someone was inside her house and that she felt like she was being watched. A sudden burst of static interrupted the call as the operator quickly began tracing the location, trying to keep the caller calm and assuring her that help was on the way. But before the girl could say anything more, the call suddenly dropped. Within seconds, the system traced the call to a small house at the end of Maple Street. One of the officers looked at the address and frowned, mentioning that no one had lived there for years. According to official records, the house had been abandoned for over 10 years, but a call like that could not be ignored. A patrol car was dispatched immediately. As the officers drove through the empty streets, something about the situation felt wrong. The night was too quiet, too still. When they arrived, the house stood in complete darkness, with no lights and no movement, just an old broken structure at the end of a silent road. The front door was slightly open, creaking slowly as the wind pushed against it. The officers exchanged a glance before stepping inside. Dust covered everything, and their footsteps echoed through the empty space. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and the air felt thick, like no one had been there for years. One of the officers quietly muttered that something didn't feel right as they began checking each room. There were no signs of anyone living there, no footprints, and no recent activity, just silence. Then suddenly they heard something, a faint repetitive tapping sound coming from the hallway. They followed it slowly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as the sound grew clearer with every step. It led them to a small room at the end of the hallway. Inside, the room was almost completely empty, except for one thing, an old telephone sitting on a dusty table. It looked untouched, as if time itself had ignored it. And then, without warning, the phone started ringing. The sound was loud and unnatural, echoing through the silence of the house. The officers froze as it kept ringing again and again. One of them slowly stepped forward, his hand slightly shaking as he reached for it. For a brief moment, he just stared at the phone before finally picking it up. Hello? There was nothing at first, only a low static sound. Then a voice came through, weak and filled with fear. You're too late. The line went dead. The officer slowly lowered the phone, his face pale, as the room fell into complete silence. No one spoke and no one moved. The next day, the police dug deeper into the history of the house, and what they found made everything worse. 10 years ago, a young girl lived there with her family. One night, she made a 911 call, reporting that someone was inside her home. But by the time the police arrived, the house was empty. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, and the girl was gone. No body, no trace, nothing. Her case remained unsolved. But what terrified them the most was that the call they had received matched perfectly. The same voice, the same fear, and the exact same time. 2:17 a.m. That night, one of the officers couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, so he decided to go back alone. As he approached the house, the street was once again empty and silent. The house stood there, waiting, darker than before. This time, the front door was already open. He stepped inside, his flashlight shaking slightly as he called out, but there was no answer. Then he heard it again, the same tapping sound echoing softly through the hallway. He followed it slowly, his heart pounding harder with every step. When he reached the room, the door was closed, but the tapping was clearly coming from inside. He pushed it open. The room looked exactly the same, empty, except for one thing. The telephone was already off the hook. Before he could react, a soft voice whispered from behind him, asking why he didn't come. His body froze as he slowly turned around, but there was no one there. Then, suddenly, the phone began to speak on its own. 911, what's your emergency? His eyes widened as he realized that the same call was playing again, repeating itself as if it had never ended. Then a cold whisper came from right beside his ear, telling him that he had left her. The flashlight slipped from his hand and hit the floor as darkness swallowed the room. The next morning, when the officers returned to the house, it was empty once again. No sign of the officer, no footprints, no evidence, nothing. Just the old telephone sitting on the dusty table. And at exactly 2:17 a.m., it rang again. Some calls don't come from the present. They come from something still waiting to be answered. If you're still here, that means you survived the story. Leave a like and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your phone rang at 2:17 a.m.? Subscribe, because the next call might be for you.